Yeah.
All after. Yeah. But
We are live.
All right, welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We are going to welcome our next witness, which is the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm Catherine Dimitruk. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission.
And hi, I'm Charlie Baker. I'm the Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, but we're really here on behalf of our state association, which all the RPCs are a part of.
And so what we're going to do today is just give you an overall introduction of the Regional Planning Commission. For some of you, this will be review. And then we'll talk a little bit about our accountability, our funding, how we're involved in state policy, and part of implementing the Act 250 Housing Bill, Act 181 that was passed last year, and then highlight some of our programs that we work on. So regional planning commissions, in the absence of county government in the state, really serve as the connecting agency between the towns, the state, and federal programs. We both work for our towns as well as work for the state. We are all political subdivisions of the state of Vermont, so we are government entities formed specifically as political subdivisions. So we work in a variety of different areas, as shown here, from transportation planning to water quality, economic development, and housing. We do that work at a regional level. We do it working with our state and federal agencies. And then we work on these areas providing technical assistance to our towns. As you know, most of our towns do not have the staff capacity they need to meet the requirements that they have to follow these days. And so we really serve as their staffing arm to help them get work done in all of these areas. So among 11 regional planning commissions, there's a map there that shows you where they all are. We have about 135 staff members. So collectively, when we work together, we're really about the size of a moderately sized state department of government when you think of us as a whole and collectively. And we really do a lot of work together to make sure we collaborate and communicate and coordinate to do a statewide delivery of services and programs across these 11 regions. And one example of that is just in last year, we're talking about serving as the staff for our towns. For 113 towns, we help them do grant applications for specific grant programs to bring resources into their communities to meet their needs.
Representative Bartholomew.
Just looking at that map, the geographic areas served are vastly different. Is it based on population, or how were those developed?
They were developed back in the 60s when they were first organized, and which communities chose to work together to serve the needs. And in many cases, you can see it's, especially in the upper part of the state, it's based on county lines. As you travel down through the state, the spine of the Green Mountains tends to serve more as the dividing line for the north-south dividing line. And so it was really a local decision that led to those boundaries.
Okay. Kind of becoming more arbitrary over time, but not based on population.
Not based on
Okay.
population, no.
Representative Tagliavia.
You said you help towns with grant applications. How do you determine which towns get aid, or is it equal among all towns?
It's really equal among all towns. So as long as we have the capacity, when we have a town that asks for help, we do it. And so let's talk about who we work for. I noted that, we do work for the state, we do work for the federal government, and we do work for our towns, but we are really governed by our towns. Our boards are made up of locally appointed representatives, and they set our policy, our program priorities. They're the ones that make sure we serve that technical assistance role to our communities. And then we all have executive committees that really serve as the more detailed part of the board that really focuses on working with the executive director to make sure we are doing our jobs as we need to ensure that all of the staff is serving the needs of the region and the communities. Additionally, we all have separate policy committees that work on specific detailed areas like transportation, like water quality, like brownfields assessment and redevelopment. In terms of funding, we have although we're Vermont's only regional government, besides the small county courts and sheriff, we don't have any general tax revenue, so we don't have any taxing authority. We'll make that very clear. And so we are funded with a combination of state and federal funding sources with some very limited private foundation funding. And then we are also supported by municipal dues. our municipalities contribute between 5 and 7% or just under 10% of our overall budgets. But they are our most flexible funding sources and really serve to leverage all of the other funding sources that you see there, most of which require a match, a non-federal or non-state match. And so our municipalities really help us leverage additional funds that we bring to the towns and the regions. And so we really work with a variety of different funders, from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development for our basic regional planning funds, Vermont Agency of Transportation, Agency of Natural Resources, Emergency Management, Agency of Administration, I'm just reading these out, Buildings and General Services, Department of Public Service, Vermont Department of Health, the USDA, more specifically with the US Department of Agriculture, more specifically with their Rural Development arm, Environmental Protection Agency, Economic Development Administration, the USDOT, which is pretty obvious, and the Northern Borders Regional Commission. So that's a quick snapshot of all the different funding sources that we cobble together to serve the needs of our communities, our regions, and the state. All of those funders, when they give us a grant, have specific performance requirements, specific project deadlines. And so the work that we do, we are very accountable to those. Every hour of work gets billed to a specific project, program, or performance grant.
I'm curious if towns, are they required to contribute, or it's voluntary?
It's voluntary.
But they still are on your regional planning, whether they contribute or not. And then can you give me an example of the Vermont Department of Health work that you might be doing?
So we've done a couple of different things with the Vermont Department of Health. Most recently, we've been working with them on health equity. And that is a broad term used to describe efforts to make sure that every project and program that impacts a person's health is available to all people on an equal basis. And so one of the things that we worked on in our region related to that is on recreation paths, to make sure that all of our communities that wanted to have a recreation path had the capacity to start working on a project like that, and whether they had the local resources or not.
Thank you. Representative Pritchard.
Yeah, give me an example of a V-Trans grant.
All right, so we're going to talk about that in more detail in just a minute,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind, if it's okay to hold that question.
Yeah.
All right.
So what we had what Chairman Schilling was talking about, would that apply to rail trail, or is that? Yeah, okay.
You're definitely.
Yeah, you're talking. So another role that we play, one important one, is on state policy. Because we work in all of these different program areas and we work so closely with our communities and state agencies, we can really be your resource to talk about state policy questions or issues. And we're also frequently asked to serve on myriad boards, committees, conference groups. So we really do get involved a lot in state policy coordination and conversations. And one in particular that we're very much involved in right now is implementation of last year's Housing and Act 250 bill, Act 181. Right now, the bill put in some immediate exemptions for Act 250 for housing. Those are in place, and for the copy that you have electronically, when you click on that, you'll be able to get to the map that shows you where those areas are. We have worked to develop a consistent approach to how we are going to do our future land use mapping, which is going to serve as the basis for future Act 250 exemptions and the state incentive program for downtowns and villages. Meetings with towns have started on that work. Most regions have already started meeting one-on-one with our communities to do that mapping, to do that future land use planning. And we are on schedule to complete that work by the deadline of December 2026. As a result of all of this work, there's going to be a real increased alignment between town plans, regional plans, and state plans. And so we're really looking forward to seeing long-term what this change will bring for overall state policy and investment.
Just a little note, you can see down at the bottom there, sorry, they're all of our acronyms for the different regional planning commissions, but you can see, the first one from the Kingdom, Northeastern Vermont Development Agency is going to get there this summer, and then will be kind of a ramp up over next winter, spring, and get done by fall 26.
Representative North and then Chapin.
Quick question. It says that the plans, RPCs are being updated for the plans in all 11 regional areas. the interim exemptions are in place. Are there interim exemptions within Act 181 that apply to all 11 regions? There are exemptions in all 11 areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, every village, every designated village really has an exemption out of it.
Tier 2.
Tier 2 is the status quo. So it's tier 1A, tier 1B. Those are the long-term, those are the names for the long-term exemptions that will be in place once we're done our regional
Okay, so it's
plans.
tier 1, tier 2 activity in all 11 regions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Representative Chapin.
Just out of curiosity, can you speak a little bit more about the flow of all of those regional plan updates and particularly, I'm just curious if you're bringing in additional expertise to support all of the process for every regional
Yeah.
plan and did regional plans have to be updated somewhere around this timeline anyway, or is this like a really big change in process?
So take your last question first. Regional plans are adopted every 8 years. So we have the same timeline as local plans. And we were all at different stages. So some of us had just finished a regional plan update and now we'll do another one. And some are wrapping one up now and then we'll dive into this next update. Northeastern Vermont Development Association did bring on consulting assistants to help augment their staff because, you saw the map, they do have more towns to meet with. So they were able to augment their staff with consulting help to get it done. The rest of us are doing it with our existing staff. At least for our region, we had a bit of a break because municipal planning grants were delayed this year. So we're taking that time that we would normally start working in detail with our towns on their projects to do the regional plan instead. So the timing actually really well.
So will this throw everybody on to like, okay, the entire state is updating the regional plans every 8 years?
Yeah,
roughly in the
it'll-
same
it'll-
2-year period?
It'll really bring us into, this a 2-year period where most regions will be doing their full update and adoption. Yeah, so in many ways, I think that could be a real benefit.
But then something will come up and one of us will update a plan in between and we will be on an off cycle. So it's good to have the flexibility, we're not all on one date certain. And frankly, for the land use review board, we're hoping, and we've started some conversation with them, like hopefully this flow works for them. They can kind of ramp up their reviews and be really ready next winter. In addition to what Catherine mentioned, we also help a lot with planning, zoning, mapping. 188 towns last year got planning and bylaw assistance. 180 towns got mapping assistance. So the vast majority of the state. And just down at the bottom, we thought you might be interested in seeing just kind of some tallies of how that work has progressed really over the years, right? This has been years and years of work. About 240 towns now have town plans. 207 towns have zoning with floodplain bylaws. And an additional 37 only have floodplain bylaws. So you got to kind of add 207 and 37 together to get who's got floodplain bylaws. And then we only have 17 towns that don't have anything, no bylaws whatsoever.
But you don't mention subdivision bylaws on that. Would
Yeah,
you
that
know-
one is a little, it's probably something less than the zoning.
Yeah, it is something less than,
It's about, I think, 150.
I think that's what I remember.
Thank you. That's a good note for next time we do this. Thank you.
Add that to the list.
And then housing, just kind of the direct work. If you remember a year or so ago, we got funded for housing navigator work. So we've been last year provided help directly to 94 towns. And that ranged from maybe we were working with them on their zoning bylaws to it might have been more programmatic or more just guidance to property owners about how to do accessory dwelling units or things like that. One example here is the Rutland RPC produced a housing resource guide that's getting used by property owners in their region that combined information from 15 organizations, 50 resources into one single document. And I think they've been getting some good reviews in response to that document. So, and just more on housing and just how to further housing. And this is not an official VAFTA position or anything, but just some directors with some thoughts. And also just hearing what may be coming your way, but funding financing to help with the infrastructure. So, as the town decides, oh, we want to grow here, do they have the water system capable that the wastewater system? We're going to see a lot of demand in those areas. Second issue is still, there's still issues with appeals and not Act 250 appeals necessarily, but appeals of the town permits now. So we need to look at that, and maybe there's a differential expectation of what happens where everybody's aligned about where we do want growth. So that's something to look at. And then other state permits, DEC, wetlands, stormwater permits, State Historic Preservation Office permits, are they also helping address the housing needs in our communities? So those are planting some seeds. We don't have any specific bills or anything like that, but economic community development, we helped 126 towns last fiscal year. And this is stuff that we also work on with our regional development corporation. So they tend to work more directly with the businesses. We work with the towns to make sure there's a receptive environment for business growth. And sometimes that's infrastructure, sometimes it's the regulations. And there's an example here of what NVDA did with the town of Albany. And you can see them kind of going through the whole process from town plan update to get a village center. And then they went and got brownfields funds to help do an assessment. They got tax credits to help turn a former blighted gas station into a new Albany general store. So that's the kind of thing. And I don't know, we should put a time frame because this took years, right? And so we're also the staff that can kind of help stick with the project over time, as our towns are mostly volunteers. Brownfields, we get brownfields money from both the state sometimes and directly from EPA. 55 towns had assessment work done last year, or maybe even cleanup. An example down here of, again, NVDA helping St. J with EPA assessment and cleanup funds to turn a former industrial site to new housing and using mass timber to a new construction technique for 35 houses. So that's one example. Transportation plan. Do you want to talk to this one?
Sure. So your question about transportation, what are some examples? So regional planning commissions work in transportation in a variety of different ways. We are direct partners with the Agency of Transportation under what's called the Transportation Planning Initiative. Through that work, we work directly with our towns to help VTrans make sure that their projects and programs meet the needs of our communities. And we all have transportation committees that are made up of local officials, and we use that as a direct voice from towns to the Agency of Transportation. Additionally, we work directly with towns on things like traffic counts, road inventories to help them meet their municipal roads general permit, which is a water quality permit. We help them assess their roads and identify projects to do the improvements necessary to comply with that state permit. We serve as project managers for projects. So if town gets a grant to do a giant culvert replacement, we help manage the project because towns don't have the capacity to do it. So we'll hire the contractor. We'll make sure the design plans are done. We'll make sure all the permits are applied for, and we'll make sure that the construction is done the way it's supposed to be done. So we'll serve from the very beginning, from the grant application all the way to the ribbon cutting, and we'll be that back of the house project manager. Additionally, we get to do fun projects like the one that we highlighted here. But our region is blessed with 2 long rail trails, one from St. Albans to Richford, and one is part of the Lamoille Valley from St. Johnsbury to Swanton. And we worked to develop an interactive trail map so you can plan your trip and identify which businesses along the way are welcoming cyclists, are welcoming walkers, are welcoming snowmobilers. And that serves as a tourism tool, a recreation tool, and a business development tool. And so we were really excited about that project. Did that answer your question?
Sure did.
All right, great.
Yeah, you were right on the rail trail. Clean water. So this may be a little bit more germane to this committee. We helped last year 204 towns work on water quality projects. Some of that, as Catherine mentioned, is related to the municipal roads general permit, which is a permit requirement on towns. Others of it may result from those of us in the Champlain Basin are clean water service providers. So we're working on the non-regulatory projects to help get to the TMDL. Sorry, looking at how much introduction you've had to some of these, the total maximum daily.
Deep on TMDA. That's one place. Thank you for asking, but we have had
All
a
right,
fair
so
amount of
we'll use the
background.
acronyms and move on.
All right, excellent. And so one example here is in Addison County, RPC, they use some of that funding that we get from DEC as a clean water service provider in the Vermont Family Forest to reduce erosion on some forestry roads there and achieve almost a 15 kilogram per year reduction in phosphorus. So those are the kinds of voluntary projects we're working on with property owners. And that's long, hard, slow road. So maybe we can talk further about that at another time.
Tagliavia.
Oh, sorry.
I'm curious, 15.9 kilograms per year, how do you come to that number? Do you actually do soil testing to find out?
It's, my short answer would be because DEC said so, but, we're actually, and the more, but to explain it more, DEC has come up with, estimates. So they have an estimating tool, like kind of based on how much land area is being treated, and what kind of treatment to calculate what kind of phosphorus reduction you go. So it's an estimated.
Okay,
tool.
so there's not,
Tool.
because I'm sure the phosphorus levels all over the state are vary. That's why I was curious how you were able to come up with
Yeah.
such an exact number.
Yeah, because we're using this calculating tool that DEC has created. So that provides the ability for us to give consistent methodology to DEC as they're aggregating all this and then reporting to EPA on our progress, right? So they have a strong interest in a consistent methodology to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Representative Pritchard.
Yeah, are they testing the waters in those areas? I mean,
they may be-
estimate, that's pretty vague.
Yeah,
They do some ground, they do
Yeah.
ground truthing of the
Okay.
model to make sure that it's within an acceptable range, but I think the cost of doing specific testing at each site would not be beneficial. I think while there's some drawbacks to a model, there's drawbacks to having to test each particular site and get to the precise measurement as well. So I think they've
Cost
struck a
also.
good balance of having a model that uses the averages that's ground truthed.
yeah, that's a kind of a joint EPA DEC model that they've worked on together. But that's diving further into Clean Water Act, which it's been quite a few years since we've been
And
here
that's
talking about
that's
Clean
now
Water.
the extent of my knowledge, so I will
Yeah.
answer no further questions, detailed questions.
We are in the throes of a pretty deep dive on the
Yeah.
water legislations that was passed and checking in.
Yeah.
That's where we started the session.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, let us know, particularly for the municipal roads general permit and clean water service provider work, if anything we can help with that.
Great. We will have you in on that.
Yeah, thank you. Energy planning is another area that the legislature's had us do work. We now have 228 towns have comprehensive energy plans. There's also, and we do that, the Department of Public Service Commissioner reviews those plans and kind of approves those. So there's like actual a pretty significant process there. We highlighted down at the bottom here a grant program that's been going on the last couple of years through the things in general services, the Municipal Energy Resilience Program. And we did mini grants with 176 towns with free energy assessment on over 600 buildings. And that ultimately resulted in 126 towns getting almost $36 million in investment into their town buildings. And most of those were some level of weatherization or heat pump. But I think the good news for taxpayers, this is a really small thing on property taxes, is reducing those municipal costs, right? We're trying to get the more energy efficient those buildings are, the less it's costing to operate those buildings each year.
Well, I have a question though. Is this the same? This isn't the same as enhanced energy planning for your town plan.
Yes,
It is. So we have 228 towns that have done that.
Yep.
That's great. I thought that's really good to know. Representative Tagliavia.
MERP grant, how does that work with the town? Is that just, you come to a number, it gets dumped into town budget, or does the bill get sent to you? How can the town plan, like you said, for tax savings for future tax levy? You know, if it was granted today, how could that possibly be applied? Or is that not the way the payments are set up?
So the funding will go to municipalities directly, so it will run through the municipal budget because it's a grant to the towns. And it is for specific projects to do improvements to a building. So, for example, there's an assessment for a fire station that showed that you should first you need to weatherize, then you need to do heat pumps, and then you need to do like a series of other things. And that funding will prioritize those projects. The towns will get those projects done and then get reimbursed by the grant.
Oh, it's a reimbursement.
It's a reimbursement
Just
grant.
wanted, that's what I thought it was. I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify.
And then long-term, that will be, both a money savings for energy costs, but also it will help these buildings last longer. Because a lot of the energy, if you've done some work in your own homes, you know that a lot of the energy efficiency work that you do to save air escaping also helps with the integrity of the building. So it's a win-win for communities. And RPCs are helping towns get service project managers for that program too. So a lot of the towns in many of our regions that got these, $500,000 grants to do multiple projects, it's an added administrative burden on the town. So we're helping with project management and helping to get those projects done.
Emergency preparedness. So this is something we work on with Vermont Emergency Management. We get a little bit of grant money every year to do this work with them. We have 260 towns that kind of actively, mostly that's the local emergency management plan that's referenced down at the bottom. And obviously, we've had Christian, who is our peer in Central Vermont RPC, talking to other committees about like his work in Plainfield after the flooding the last couple of summers, and just working with that community to figure out how to. And this is long-term recovery work now. I think he mentioned they have like 30 houses that are getting bought out. They're working with the town to look at growth area for, at least be able to accommodate 30 more houses, upland in flood safe areas. So anyway, there's a lot of work that we get involved with. When a disaster happens, actually, we are also what VEM calls the local liaison. So they ask us to reach out to our town to find out what damage we have. So we're kind of that very front end of like how much damage actually happened. So it helps the state focus resources. And then we also have 2 or 3 people that are trained to work in the State Emergency Operations Center. So subsequent to Irene, actually during Irene, they needed more help. We stepped in to help at that time. And ever since then, we've had an agreement with BEM where we have trained staff that help them if they do have to open up the SEOC. We can help support that so they don't have to have peak staff all the time on their staffing.
Representative Tagliavia.
With regard to development in village areas and stuff like that, and then we get into flooding. A lot of these villages sprung up how many years ago? 80, 100, 200 years ago, because they were near the river. Maybe there was a mill, there was transportation. Now there's this push or endeavor to get people in high population areas, but the high population areas tend to be in or near the floodplain. How do we balance that? Because there's the infrastructure already, and now we want to move people a little bit to higher elevation. Doesn't that create a bigger problem? How do we balance the maintenance of our infrastructure for flood mitigation and not have to incur higher costs by moving more people? And, taking
Welcome.
historic buildings, and what are you gonna do with them?
Yeah, so multiple approaches depending on the situation, right? So certainly there's going to be some towns where they're working on floodproofing buildings that are in the floodplain. I think we're seeing, particularly the state, or, if you look at the transit center building here, right, that got built, it's in the floodplain, but it's at a higher elevation,
Okay.
right? And so there's some things like that that can be done. Those are more redeveloped flood-proofing type situations within that area. Yeah, and then we're, to your point, trying to make sure that new housing isn't getting built in unsafe areas. That's, primary concern. And then to follow that up, okay, then where are safer places to build new housing? Because there is infrastructure and services in those village centers, right? And so that's a lot of the work we're doing, frankly, with these land use plans. And I think we had a lot of conversation here in this committee last year about this balancing act. Like, there's resources there's infrastructure, maybe water systems, sewer systems that we're trying to take advantage of. And to us also, this growth in those areas is going to help grand list growth and maybe, help those towns be a little stronger fiscally. So, and there's a lot of work. It's a lot of the work that we're doing right now with our towns on these land use maps.
Well, my big concern is, you had 2 summers in a row where there was flooding.
Yep.
And you have homes that have been there for a very long time. Families, maybe 2-3 generations have been there. And for someone to come and say, well, you're just gonna have to pick up and move. That's quite a kick in the gut. Trying to balance that to me is the biggest hurdle.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's the role we're playing. I think, and a lot of times those are coming down to individual homeowners, like,
The
do they?
buyouts are voluntary.
Yeah, those are all voluntary buyouts. So the homeowner has to decide, I've had enough and I want out, which I hate to phrase it that way, but I think that's a lot of what is happening in those situations. So those are, tough.
260 towns. I mean, are you doing with the Buells and Gord? Little double counting.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Well, there's the villages and
Yeah, it's the villages.
Okay.
They have a village center.
Yeah.
Yes.
Should we update the 251 club then?
It's all different depending upon what you're doing, right? Whether you count the villages or not.
Yeah. Well, I think you should probably say villages then too, because it's like, it is a little confusing.
Towns and villages.
And they're separate? I mean, like, I don't think in East
Depends.
Millbury, I don't think we have a separate emergency plan. We,
Depends.
It depends on
yeah, okay,
how much governance the village is taking on.
okay.
Yeah, so some of them are doing more and some of
We
them are
have
doing
one
less.
incorporated village that does a joint plan with the town and the rest of them do separate plans.
Does an emergency plan include like an emergency plan for like a water system? Or,
It depends upon the community. Sometimes the water system plan is like an annex to the local emergency management plan, and sometimes the water system will have their own standalone response plan. And there are challenges with water system rebuilds because of FEMA funding. Johnson is a great example. Where FEMA will pay to repair it where it is, but won't pay to move it to a safer place.
Representative Austin?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you are kind of looking forward a little bit in terms of the cost of restoring damage after flooding, because California is like $233 billion now. I'm concerned about FEMA and that is a funding source, and I'm concerned about private insurance, pulling out, and I'm concerned that it will fall back on municipalities at some point in the future. And I'm just wondering, are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, one of the main areas that we work in emergency planning is in hazard mitigation, I will say. So at the hazard mitigation resiliency work is really looking at how we can future-proof our communities and specific places within our communities to make sure damage is less in the future. And, we had a micro example in our region where we had this town who did a culvert replacement that we helped model to make sure it could handle the higher floods that are predicted with climate change. And there were many people in the town who were like, why are we spending so much money on this culvert? That town got hit with a major rainstorm. Other places in the town flooded. That culvert held, it managed the additional water. It prevented flooding upstream because the culvert was able to function the way it needed to. So we do a lot of projects like that. And then on the macro level, in central Vermont and in the Lamoille River corridor, across the 3 regional planning commissions, we're working on a project to actually model the rivers to say, like, if it reaches flood stage here in Hardwick, what does that mean for Georgia and how many hours later? And so where are our most vulnerable structures? What do we need to do now to help make sure that those are protected?
Great, good, thank you.
Do you provide input to towns with regard to, like you said, you upsized the culvert and it made a big difference? What about, and I'm thinking about a specific road that I helped rebuild, where there's the trees that have fallen across the creek or river that right now there's no problem. But looking at the damage that was done and the home that I still don't understand how it didn't get hit. When those trees rot to a certain point and they break and they plug up the culvert bridge that's there, we're gonna have damage to that road that was just repaired. How do you provide input, or do you, to A&R or anybody else who says, no, you gotta leave that there?
So That is definitely a policy conversation that is going to need to happen at the state level
I agree.
because of how much damage that has happened in the last 2 seasons. That makes that debris question an even bigger one than it was in the past. At the local level, we're involved in those conversations. When we work with towns to do their hazard mitigation planning, we work with the towns specifically to identify those particular hotspots that the towns are concerned about, either because there's an undersized culvert or there's exceptional debris in the river, or there's a road whose, the bank has gotten closer and closer and closer every year. And so we know that problem is coming. So we do it on 2 levels.
Thank you.
When that policy conversation happens at the state level, we're happy to be at the table.
And sorry, we're at the end here. Just this last slide is really just talking about other kinds of partnerships, just as examples, where we work with our regional development corporations on comprehensive economic development strategies. We also have actually combined to form economic development districts with them. We also did a lot to support the startup of the communications union districts around the state. Some of us are still involved with those, and that's to provide broadband. That's the system the state set up, the legislature set up a few years ago on broadband. Some of us are still staffing those CUDs, and other CUDs have kind of grown up and hired their own executive directors, which is great. But we're still involved in that effort. Clean water service providers, we mentioned a little bit, public safety, energy, all those kinds of things we're still involved with. And just this last bullet there is just, this point about we're one of the few entities that kind of stay engaged with the town, even as select boards turnover, we kind of provide some level of consistency from initial planning concept all the way through, as Catherine mentioned, various projects, all the way through project management and ribbon cutting. So, and then just a recent example, I think it was last year's BAA included this municipal technical assistance program. It was like $3 million through the Agency of Administration. They partnered with the RPCs. We contracted with one of us, Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission. In this case, we then subbed funds out to the rest of us to work with those the towns that have the least capacity. So they had an index. I don't know if you remember any of this, for those of you that were here, that was trying to look at the capacity of the towns to deal with their own issues. So Chittenden County was at the bottom of that list, and a lot of other towns were at the top. And so that's been, I think, successful also in helping those towns with the least capacity.
Are you finished with your story?
We are done.
With regard to the communication union districts,
Yes.
broadband, is that targeted solely toward ground-based fiber optic, or are there other options available to for the union districts or the towns to explore?
Probably a better question for the broadband board, but my impression has pretty much been fiber focused.
Fiber focuses.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's coming from state statutory language or if that's a decision of the
Federal
broadband board.
funding programs.
Or maybe federal funding programs, yeah.
Okay, the only reason I ask is because, some more remote places has satellite been an option or
It may be an option
consideration?
for a homeowner. I don't think the broadband board has been investing in those.
Okay,
So that's a good question for you to take offline with others who are experts in it.
okay.
And just thank you to sum up.
Thank you. That was great.
Very much.
Thank you.
Always appreciate everything you all do.
Oh, actually, I got the presentation, so
You
I
got
got it.
So, members, we are finished for the day. And I guess I would say that we won't always have Friday afternoons off, but take advantage of the fact that you do your expenses, do your constituent communications, and have a great weekend. We'll see you back in committee on Tuesday.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, nice.